Welcome to the National Women's Fitness Academy podcast. We're here to talk about women's health, female hormones, body image, and all things health and fitness.
Hello, girls, and welcome back to another episode of the Women's Fitness Academy's podcast. I'm your host, Siggy, one of the WFA's educators and a women's body image and fitness coach. Today's podcast is going to be a freaking goodie. And I know I say this with every podcast, but today we're going to be exploring a lot about the feminine side of our minds, our bodies, and I'm going to be covering this with the one and only Cara Ivy, who is a women's nutritionist and also an embodiment coach. So Cara, thank you so much for joining us. And for those who don't know you, would you mind explaining what exactly it is that you do?
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you so much for having me on today, Siggy. And yeah, so as you mentioned, I'm a women's health practitioner and a feminine embodiment coach. And I guess what that really entails and how I explain what I do is I really work with women and not only their hormones and their nervous system, but working with them to come back into their body. So when we look at the women's health side of things, I work with women to support their hormones, their digestive system, and their nervous system. But a key pillar in the work that I do is really coming back into the feminine and also coming back into their body. So what that means, and the reason this is so important, well, I believe anyway, and the work that I do with women is so often we are completely disconnected from our body and we tend to operate in a heightened or a lower aroused state. So what this kind of means is we tend to operate in ways that are outside of ourselves, right? So what embodiment really does is it takes the power back into the person. So it brings you back into your body. So rather than me as a practitioner telling you what to do, it comes back to what is really important for you in this moment. And how can we become more in touch with the subtle sensations and the subtle emotions that are actually driving these behaviors and habits and also driving, I guess you could say, hormonal dysfunction. Because even when we look at hormones, we look at how the nervous system plays such a huge role in our hormonal health. So if we're working on regulating periods or working on skin or working on anything to do with our cycles, if we're not kind of coming back into what your body in particular needs, it's much harder for us to have long-term success and long-term results with our hormone health and longevity. So yeah, I guess in a roundabout way, embodiment really is coming back to the body and connecting with the essence of the feminine and also the masculine to bring inner harmony back to our nervous system.
I love that. That's so well put together. And hopefully our listeners do understand this. And it's so interesting that we've opened this conversation about that because most women don't trust their own intuition, or if they do, they're confused about the signals that they are getting from it. Have you come across that case?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a huge one, isn't it? And as part of my own sort of journey as well, I know what it's like. I know what it's like to be kind of in that, I guess, that hustle or even just that too busy to come back to stillness. And oftentimes, and it seems like it's something that we can just get away with not doing, get away with not slowing down, or get away with not listening to these cues. But I don't know if you find it as well in your coaching, Siggy, but when we arrive back and when we can kind of recognize these cues, especially when it comes to our hunger cues as a really good example, is like if we can identify whether it is an emotional hunger, whether it is a true physical hunger and we actually just need to eat a meal, or whether we're just kind of wanting a little taste of something for the enjoyment, the pleasure. It's really that's a really good cue for us to begin with. And I work with a lot of women around that side of things too, is like, how can we recognize the cues of not only stress, anxiety, maybe depression, but also the cues of our hunger, because that's going to dictate how well we can nourish our bodies too, right?
And it's such an important highlight, especially around food. And I'm so glad that you brought this up, because we have such a close connection with our bodies and food. And we know as women, we tend to overeat or undereat or binge eat. So it's truly fascinating to be able to detect exactly what clients are going through in terms of the food. As you mentioned, like with food, is it emotional aspect or is it a stress? And too often it is based on emotions, because when we're feeling sad, we're wanting something to comfort us and feel happy, hence whether it's like chocolate or ice cream. So I love the fact that you're digging in deeper to find that root cause of like what is actually happening and how to tap into that intuition in a much clever way of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And then as we sort of move through and we identify where this is coming from, embodiment is also about using tools. So for example, I use a lot of like shadow work, but I also use a lot of like body-based work as well, of like, how can we actually bring this through the body? So whether it is, say emotional eating, let's use that example, emotional eating that is stemming from maybe a stress that happened at work, right? It's like, if we can identify that, that's amazing. But then how can we take it a step further to then really work through the pattern of that stressor that potentially happens every day or every week. So we're constantly being activated and we're constantly then feeling like either emotional eating or just disconnecting from our bodies. So when that stressor happens, if we can bring awareness to it in the moment, but then if we can really use some tools, like I teach my clients tools of embodiment practices. So not only a simple technique like a felt sensation of like, yes, using the breath, but using the breath and dropping from the mind into the body, really just taking like a pause and just breathing and feeling like what's actually in the body. And then sometimes as well, like using practices to just fully shake it out, like dancing, moving, like letting the energy flow through. Because we know that over time, and this is all through like very new literature and research as well, we know that if we aren't processing emotions, they become stored in the body. And when emotions are stored in the body, this is when we see stagnation, we see dis-ease, and we also see hormonal imbalances. And that's why I'm so passionate about that combination, is because, we can start with something of like emotional eating. We can then track it to sort of like the stressor that triggered it, that then kind of impacts the nervous system, that then dysregulates our hormones. So, we could give all the supplements and all the dietary advice in the world, but if we're really not addressing the root cause, which is the nervous system, it's much harder to maintain this long term. And, I've worked with like hundreds of women in a clinical setting over the last, 4 to 5 years. And I've supported them with, diet, nutritional supplementation, nutritional compounding. Like I've dived into all of that and got incredible results. But it gets you to a point where it's like, okay, they then come back maybe a year later or, however long later. And that's when we know that we need to dive deeper. We need to really give tools to regulate the nervous system and regulate the body properly, so that in those moments, it can cut the cycle, it can cut the pattern, and it can allow for that transformation and that progression with their health as well.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. And like you said, you're wanting to find the root cause, where usually it does come, it's set from the mindset, the nervous system side of things. And too often people, it's not that they neglect it, they just trying to find other ways of treating the symptoms. And we know sometimes the symptoms is not actually the root cause, it's what's actually happening in whole. So it's really cool to, obviously, as a nutritionist yourself, to find out not only through your own experience, but with working with clients, it's like realizing, okay, well, your hormones are fucked, your gut is so upset, your stress is like so high, like the combination of all of them is going to affect the nervous system first, because we know if that is not working well, everything else from like the head down is not going to work optimally either.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's incredible. And I think as well, being able to use, like, it's a killer convo, right? Being able to use that embodiment nervous system work, mindset work, same as yourself, is like, it's incredible to be able to integrate that. But then also, I don't know if you do any of this as well, but I do a lot of also like blood work and pathology and functional testing. So it's not always needed, but to be able to integrate those things, to be able to use like that clinical decision making of, all right, is it anemia or is it your nervous system's, completely dysregulated, and being able to dive in so that we're not overlooking things, because I believe it does. It's like, it's that holistic approach of like, everything can fit, but which piece of the puzzle do we really need to work on, which is most important to really support your healing journey. So
yeah, it's so true. And speaking of healing journey, like, we all have our wonderful story of what made us become what we're wanting to and what we're doing today. So do you have a specific time in your life where there was like a flip where you're like, oh, like I need to heal myself, or I need to make this change, which led you to what you're doing today?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was, like a lot of women, put on the pill at a very young age. So at about 13 or 14, I was put on the pill for my skin. So I had quite bad acne. I had very low self-confidence, not so great body image at that age as well. So my sort of journey with my body image and confidence started at a young age. So I sort of worked through the skin issues. The pill solved a lot of my skin issues during high school. I had quite clear skin. And then when I was 20, I remember just researching. I was just fascinated about health, natural health, and ways that we can heal the body. And I sort of was like, I'm taking a pill every day. I wonder if there's another way. So I remember just diving really deep into like hormones and how we can really look at our menstrual cycle and the power of the menstrual cycle and what we can really do to understand our cycle. So I was like, right, I'm going to get off the pill. Can't wait to get my periods back and just see what my cycle is like. And then what happened is I didn't get a period for 2 years. And it was devastating at the time because I was told, you're infertile, you're not going to be able to, have kids, you've got PCOS. I went to a number of specialist gynecologists just to see what was going on with my periods. And I just couldn't get any answers. So at the time, during that time, I started studying nutritional medicine. I was at uni. And I just continued to explore what was happening with my body. And through, I guess, that devastating experience of being told, like, you won't be able to have kids and all of these things, it didn't feel true to me. I feel very fertile, and I knew it wasn't the case. And I knew that I wasn't going back on the pill. So that really just sparked a fire inside of me that just never let go. And still to this day, I'm just so passionate about not only educating women about the pill, and, I'm all for choice. And I think it's an educated choice that we need to be made, because I felt so powerless at the time. Like I felt like it was my only option and there's nothing else I could do. So I believe that whatever decision we make, if it's an empowered and educated decision, then it's the right one for you. But yeah, so that was sort of my journey with all of that. And I believe that that's really what stoked the fire for me, to just be like, how incredible are our hormones? And I want a period, and I want to know how my period works, and then how I can use it to my advantage, right? How I can tap into my softness, my creativity, which then also kind of led me to explore much more of like the feminine, because I was in my masculine for so long, pushing, hustling, working hard, and so dysregulated without realizing that it kind of intertwined of like getting to know my periods, healing my PCOS, and then there's this other side that works in synergy, is like tapping into that feminine and working with my body. So I guess that's like a little recap of how I got so passionate about this work.
I love it. And you know what? I think a lot of our listeners will be nodding their head right now, going, I've been there, done that. I'm hands up. I've been there. I felt so powerless many, many years ago when I went on the pill. Again, like you didn't have a choice. They just said, oh, cool. You don't want painful, I was going to say painful batteries, painful periods. Well, here you go on the pill. Or you don't want acne, go on the pill. And again, like as young adults, we didn't know any best. We were just following authority, where now there's this flora of information, but we have also more choices now as women. So it's changing, it's evolving, which is such a beautiful thing. And, you know, just like yourself and I, we're educating women to be able to make those choices for themselves without having someone going, here's a slip, get the pill, and off you go. So it's actually questioning yourself, what is happening? Is the pill actually going to be helpful or isn't it? And are there any other ways of exploring it? Which obviously there's many ways as well. But you also made a really good point about the energies. And I'm a huge advocate about spiritual stuff, the woo, feminine and masculine energy. And you brought up a point where for so many years you were tapped into your masculine energy. And you know what? I think majority of women these days are so tapped into the masculine. So when we do introduce embodiment work or some form of feminine energy, it feels very foreign to us. Very, very foreign. And for the coaches who are listening, I'm sure they can relate to, because when we're creating content, for instance, you can't create it from a masculine perspective because it's very rigid, logical, where with the feminine, creating flow and creativity, you have to come from that, you know, place of surrender. So what's your relationship now with the feminine and the masculine energies?
Yeah, so I've had, I guess, a journey of like the polar opposites, right? Of like being so in my masculine that I was almost just so focused, so activated, so driven. And then I almost went the complete other way, where I was almost too in my feminine, too flowy, too in the space of like everything will work out, right? And over the last like year or two, I've really been working with like harmonizing that in a union. So I think if there are a lot of coaches listening in this space as well, it's important to, I guess, identify the and even just people in general, but it's important to identify and to know that we don't need to be one or the other. Like feminine embodiment isn't about just being in your feminine. It's really about identifying those aspects in ourselves and how we can create inner harmony, because the feminine and masculine go so far beyond gender. It taps into more of the qualities of who we are and what makes us up. So there's sort of like the masculine that I found in my own journey is when I was too far in my feminine, I lost that safety within myself. So what I was finding is I was kind of outsourcing my safety into my partner, into external environments. So coming back in and inviting that masculine back in, and also inviting that feminine in to come together, allowed me to create a solid direction in my business, allowed me to create safety within myself to express myself, but then also allowed me to feel safe in playing in my feminine, in being creative, in dancing, in like moving how I feel, and also tapping into those darker aspects of the feminine too, of like having no fear, setting strong boundaries, feeling sexy and powerful, like those really like powerful feminine energies that have also sort of been, I guess, a bit suppressed or put into the shadows of like, nope, we can't feel that. So really just bringing those back out and playing with the polarity between both of those not only is so incredible for our own bodies, but our sexual relationships. Like my relationship with my partner is just, we've been together for like 10, 11 years now, but it goes to a new dimension when you're able to understand and feel where the polarity is and be really strong in that space of like, this is where I'm at, this is where he's at, and how can we kind of blend that together so there is a lot of like chemistry in the relationship. And you know, it's work, but it's the work that's so worth doing, right?
Yeah, it's so true. And too often, well, before I go into that, I do have a question in regards to the feminine and masculine, because you made a really good point. Because when you were too tapped into your feminine side, you said that you were reaching out to your partner more of not necessarily him trying to make you happy, but you're reaching out because there was a little bit of confusion or loss there in terms of yourself. And I don't know if it's just me, but I feel as if some women do have too much feminine in them as well, and they're just unsure about how to balance that, because everyone talks about balance and making it work, but like no one knows what balance kind of looks like for themselves. So when you noticed yourself veering externally out when you were so tapped into your feminine, what are some things that have helped you to combine both of them in both polarities and have that balance?
Well, the big one is honestly identifying it, right? Is like actually is taking time to bring the awareness into what the feminine and masculine is. And that's what I do with a lot of my clients, like as an initial, in our initial consultation, or maybe our second, is just really explain. And even if you've done, been through millions of podcasts that talk about it and that tell you about the different traits, I always invite people to come in with really fresh eyes of like, what is the feminine and what is the masculine? And I do a practice that's called aspecting. So it's where you really connect with your higher self and you connect with the feminine part of yourself and you see what she has to say. And then you connect with the masculine part of yourself and you see what he has to say. And this is a practice I honestly do weekly now, because it doesn't have to be a long practice, but for me, it's like a 10-minute practice where I can kind of just see, do I feel more like where's my masculine lacking and where's my feminine lacking? But also where are they maybe two? Where am I two in? So I can kind of be like, this week I'm focusing on creation. So for me, if I'm focusing on creation, I want to bring more dance and play. So it's like the true me coming through. But if I'm doing my taxes and my finances, I want to bring more logic. I want to be more really grounded, focused, get shit done. So tapping into what I need in that moment can be really helpful. And also seeing where those, I guess, more wounded parts of myself may be, and where I may be going into, like for me, for example, a lot of my story has been around, I would get when I would feel that unsafe, I would then be like when I say unsafe, it would more so be like, oh, I can't do it myself. I need someone else to do it for me, kind of thing. I need you to kind of sort it out, rather than being like, no, how can I sort it out right now? How can I take charge of that in the moment? And bringing that in so I feel powerful in my moment, because otherwise that's when you can tap into the energy of maybe feeling more needy, and like that needy energy, like you don't like being in it yourself. So it's like, it's not well received either. And that's kind of like, I guess, a wounded aspect of where like you're not feeling vibrant, alive, like in charge. It's like you're giving over your power to kind of be sorted by someone else, where if you can breathe, bring awareness and check in, where is that? Okay, I can then take my power back in that moment. Maybe sound, maybe breath, maybe like let it all out, like scream, do an anger practice if you need to, and then come back in, and it just clears the energy completely. Like I remember myself and my partner, we used to go through, like, it would be months of like us, just not months, but like weeks of us kind of being in this like in between. We couldn't quite tell what was wrong. But now we're like, okay, we'll get ourselves sorted first. Like we'll get back into what we need in a relationship. We'll openly communicate that. And then we'll take a step and we'll come together and sort it out. Rather than it needing to be this like back and forth conversation of like shaming or blaming. It's like, let's center ourselves and then talk.
I love that. And you know what? That's so ideal, not just in relationships, but in other aspects of our lives. As you mentioned, it's finding that balance, whether it's within our careers, within our health. A big one, I don't speak much about it on here, but money as well. I find that this is something that a lot of people have that imbalance because they're either too in the masculine or they're just like too in the feminine. And too much in the feminine could be like spending your money like there's no tomorrow. And then too much masculine is just like not spending at all, but being really scared about actually investing and, having that fear. But you also mentioned a good point about where there was a time where you were feeling wounded as well. And you also mentioned about the dark feminine. Now, for some reason, we know for some reason the dark feminine gets a really bad rep which we know it's not necessarily a bad thing to have the dark feminine. So would you mind explaining to our listeners, what is the dark feminine and why we shouldn't be scared of her?
Yeah. So to begin with, I guess I would just say the feminine as the innate expression. So the feminine, kind of like the worldly overarching view of the feminine, is love, right? And then the overarching view of the masculine is freedom. So the masculine always desires freedom, the feminine always desires love. And that's more just like a theme of the qualities. So when we look at the more darker aspects of the feminine, they're the more, I guess, like fully, I kind of like to explain them as like the fully expressed. Like the fully expressed, like the ability to be in the power, to be beyond like the prettiness or the just to be beyond like the social conditioning of what a feminine being should be, dancy and flowy and all of those things. It's like, yes, they're well and good, but the feminine is also fierce. She's also fucking powerful. She also is like sexy and passionate. And whenever I say sexy, it's like beyond looks. It's like an energy. It's like a quality of someone in their power and someone holding their own and holding that feminine so like fiercely. And the darker feminine also has these really strong boundaries. A good way I like to, I guess, connect people to what the dark feminine may look like inside of them is throughout our menstrual cycle. So during the luteal phase, and menstruation, so just prior to bleed and when we're bleeding, that quality of where you feel more slow, where you feel more deeply, is the dark feminine. So it's the dark feminine of like, I guess we kind of shame it and blame it sometimes and say, I've got PMS, I'm raging and all of those things. But really, that quality is the dark feminine. That is when it's in a healthy expression. So when it's in a non-healthy expression, that's when it's more like chaotic, bitchy, like shameful, like those feelings. But when it's in a healthy expression and when we can recognize that, it's where we are most heightened. We can feel our emotions and they're more like deep. So it's where we can really reflect and where we can really like tap into these darker feminine qualities. So yeah, that's sort of, I guess, how I would suggest people tune into the dark feminine, is like taking time when you're bleeding, when you can, even just like an extra hour out of your day to be like, oh, this feeling of heaviness, rather than it being a shameful thing or something that we want to get rid of. How can we feel safe to deepen into it? How can we deepen into this period or this like bleeding time, this moon time, to connect with what's really there? Yeah, I find that's a beautiful way to do.
And honoring it as well, because too often we don't honor those symptoms. Yes, they're not ideal, but again, it's questioning yourself. Okay, why am I getting these symptoms? What changes do I need to make for my health not to experience it?
And also, are they not ideal because we reject them? So that's a big thing I look at as well, is like, because we live in a society, as a generalized term, that is all about fixing everything about ourselves, of like fixing our, obviously if we've got severe pain and there's a lot going on, it's very uncomfortable and we don't want to be in this. And, for some people it's excruciating, like with endometriosis, I'm not dismissing that. But even with my endometriosis clients, I recommend like having space to feel beyond the pain and to be like, how can I feel, what quality is there? Is there a place that I am rejecting myself? And it's a habit that I've progressed over the last, 5 years of like hating my body around this time, hating my cycle, shaming myself. And then from that place, it's like this tension inside. It's like when you hate something, you know that feeling of being tense. So how can we soften and approach it with curiosity? Like approach it as like a full new period of like a full new bleed. It doesn't have to be the same as the last one. How can we be really curious about what the actual sensation is, what it feels like, what the energy is actually like, rather than it being like every time it's like,
And you know what? That ties into the embodiment side of things, like really tapping into yourself realizing, okay, like how are you feeling? What are the feelings that are coming up and what can you do about it?
Yeah, absolutely. Taking that taking control, but also taking empowering yourself back to a place of love. And I think a lot of the work is coming back to love, like, because yeah, we try and fix ourselves all the time, and often I just say I work with my clients and like unlearning the fixing.
Yeah.
Something comes up, how can we not fix it? How can we be okay with what is, and how can we feel beyond that to really decide what is it, rather than coming from a place of this logic of like, this is this, and pathologizing everything. It's like, what actually is it now? How are we curious about it changing? Because this is when we allow the progression, the change, the feeling, sensation.
That, yeah, it's making me think a lot because it's just making me realize that I'm someone who loves fixing shit.
Same, darling, same, literally. It's because our science brain, like for me, and probably for yourself as well, it's like you get so deep in the science. Do you feel the same? You get so deep in the science of things?
Yeah.
And it's like we see all the research and we just, like, I know for myself, that was a big part of me in my masculine, was like, and not even in my masculine, more just like I love it. I love the research. And even still now, it's so important. Like when you're reading pathology and functional testings, like the research is so important and it tells us a lot. It's like a very good directional place. And then I feel like as well, even with you and the body image stuff that you do, that comes from a place of like, there's no science to tell us about that. You intuitively do that with your clients. And I see a lot of this more intuitive stuff, this way of the feminine, coming from the way of the feminine of like, rather than you needing to fix your periods and fix your whatever it may be, how can we see it with new eyes and come from it from a different perspective? And things change dramatically, but we can't like standardize that, and we can't research that. So it's harder to conceptualize for us. Our science brains are like, how is this working? Like we know it's working, but there's no research about it. So it's like, as you're saying, this dance between the two of like combining them so they come into harmony to really support the individual client, right?
Yeah, it's so true. It's so true because again, like with our science brain, if there's no facts there or there's no reasoning for us to actually follow a certain plan, like you said, like the feminine side, your brain's just going to be like, oh, well, this is a whole lot of shit. Like, why should I be following this? But then once you actually do the work and you notice the changes, then your mindset flips and goes, oh, okay, yes, there is evidence right there that I can follow my feminine intuition, but also follow the masculine side of things.
Yeah. And even just one last thing I'll say on that is, like, for the last 100 years, we've been in a way of the masculine, right? So everything has been research, everything has been like direction. It's just been, and even beyond like the energies, more even in like the patriarchal society that we live in, it's always been driven that way. Yeah. So it's almost an act of rebellion or a reactive embodiment for us to be bringing through these new ways, like to be teaching the masculine within ourselves, but to be teaching the masculine as a collective that there's another way, and there's a way that is magical and like incredible, and that gets things like Mother Earth, the way Mother Earth is at the moment, like the destruction that has, been created for our Earth. It's like what we so desperately need. And I think that's a good way to think of it. But we so desperately need the nurturing, the feminine to come back into, to nurture, to refeed, to seed, like all of those things. There needs to be that harmony. Like the world's gone too far one direction. So it's like I can see now and more than ever is we're paving the way for the feminine to have that expression, to have that healing nature for the world, basically. And it's beautiful to see. We've got a long way to go, but it's beautiful to see that more people are, saying yes to the feminine, saying yes to themselves. And it's hard because it's not been done. So it's still very new, but I believe this isn't something that's just, gonna go, or like it's like, oh, it's a feminine embodiment, or talking about the feminine. It's not like a fad. It's like, it's the way of the future. It's where we are heading to bring our universe, to bring our planet back into balance, back into harmony, back into healing, regeneration. Like
And the thing is, like, it's always been there, but not many people were tapping into it. Like, I'm sure our parents and their parents and generations before that, there were many ways of tapping, like witches. Come on, like, a witch was never a masculine. She was a fucking dark, powerful feminine. So
absolutely.
We know it's been like going on for centuries, but again, like you said, because science doesn't back it up, sometimes people just don't want the facts or do not want to follow it because they just don't think there's going to be a proper outcome from it. But then again, like us as coaches, and we've done our journeys through the embodiment work, through practicing a healing around energies, we realize, and teaching our clients as well, that there is another way of just following just the masculine way. And once, as you said, once tapping into that feminine side, then you're noticing, there is other ways. You can surrender. You can tap into your intuition, even though it's fucking scary at times because you just didn't know how to trust yourself. By doing more of it, you're creating a better relationship with yourself and your nervous system.
Absolutely. And it makes me, I'm just smiling now because it makes me think like the more people, the more women that are healing themselves, the more women that are doing this work. And even just like, it doesn't need to be the deepest of work, but even just the work of coming back to their body, the work of tapping into their intuition, the work of healing their hormones, understanding their cycles, like that is taking your power back. That is stepping into the path of this new way of being. And it's the small things that all add up, right? It's like the small things we can do each day, each week that bring us back to the innate knowing within us. And once you get that feeling, you'll never go back. You'll always have that peace within you that you can tap into at any time, that can create play and pleasure and purpose and all of those things.
Absolutely. And this is what I teach my clients as well. Once we tap into more the embodiment side of things, and I'm sure you do this with your clients as well. Once you have a helpful way of embodiment work, whether it's through dance, whether it's through pleasure, whether it's through mirror work, like anything is possible. Once they are able to tap into that, they're realizing how much better they feel and how calmer the nervous system is. And then all of that has that snowball effect onto the hormones, the nutrition, the lifestyle, the relationship, like everything in whole just seems a lot better.
Absolutely.
I love that. So good. Cara, what a conversation.
So powerful. Love that.
Seriously, I reckon we can continue talking about this stuff for like a very long time, but I also don't want to be talking listeners' ear off unless they're happy to continue for us to chat. But before we head off, what is one thing you would love to leave our listeners to learn a little bit more about, coming into the body and a little bit more about embodiment work?
Yeah, so I would say, well, firstly, I do have like a free ebook that if anyone did want to know more about tapping into their menstrual cycle and the connection with their cycle and how that sort of ties into embodiment, I can give you the link for that.
Yeah, we'll put it in the show notes for sure.
Beautiful. And another thing I would say is just really taking time for yourself, like just taking 5 minutes a day to really breathe. If it's as simple as just breathing and just connecting to the sensations in your body, that's probably the biggest, easiest way to just feel the power of the initial stages of getting to know your body. And what you desire is like breath, body, dropping from your mind to your body and creating play and space in your life as well.
I love that. Love everything about that. Before we head off, where can our listeners find you?
So my Instagram is @KaraIvy_, and that's probably the best place. And then from there, I've got all my links in my bio, and I've got my website there as well, which is karaivyhealth.com.
Love that. Well, girls, if you enjoyed today's podcast, please make sure that you screenshot it, tag us at the Women's Fitness Academy, tag Kara, tag myself, and then till next time, let's start tapping into that feminine. Or if you've been a little bit too much into that feminine side, let's find ways to balance into that masculine, finding that really nice, healthy balance for you all.
Thank you.